Hi class, this is the sixth and final video for this course. I'm going to go over what you have to do for this week and just kind of provide a brief recap of my thoughts on the course to this date. So your business messages have been input and revised and graded, and for the most part you guys did a fantastic job at that, right? So you guys got video feedback. I hope that was useful. My apologies to the one or two people who couldn't open up the file. That is a downside. So my apologies for that. But overall, I hope you guys found the video feedback useful. Again, your topics varied so much. I wish you guys could all kind of see the various different projects that you guys are doing to see how these various approaches to writing and kind of the questions I'm asking of you and kind of prodding you to consider are applying to widely varying processes. So overall, I was very impressed by that. And then the follow-up, the revisions that you guys made, and the completing the business message, I hope are circling back to this idea of habits that we talked about in week 1 or 2, or that I talked to you about because you can't talk back to me in these videos, unfortunately, is getting this kind of 3-part habituation process in writing, where you start just by, if you have the luxury to do so in relative depth, but if not, at least think about writing as this 3-phase type process where you are planning and kind of thinking and drafting and kind of organizing things just to kind of see what is the best way to approach this, especially for kind of high stakes documents, which a good number of you actually chose. Not necessarily innocuous kind of stuff. Think about that, and then actually do the actual hard part of writing the content. And then once you're done writing content, knowing that your job as a writer is not done at that point, that you actually have to kind of go back and circle back. Revise is kind of, they're 2 separate words. You're revisioning, you're re-seeing your piece of text with 24, 48, 72 hours of space in between, which your brain is actually doing kind of subconscious work as you're doing that, and it's kind of thinking about it even though you're not directly thinking about it. So when you go back and approach it, you're seeing new things. So it's almost like peer reviewing your own work. So if you have the luxury to do all 3 of those phases, that's what I'm trying to get you guys to buy into. And, you guys don't have to buy into it. Of course, it's my own individual approach to how I think writing can be effective in business context. But I hope, and I'm confident that many of you found that useful, and actually that a lot of you do employ some semblance of that framework already, obviously to varying extents because of the time constraints and the amount of work that you have. But for high-stakes stuff like reports or feasibility studies or kind of business proposals or any entrepreneurial documents, stuff like that, it is certainly useful to kind of go through those phases. So you're done with the business message. If you have any questions about those and you want to follow up later on, just because it's outside the parameters of the class doesn't mean I don't like to talk about writing. So send me a message, shoot me an email, something like that, and we can kind of chat things out. So the final week, you'll be doing something that actually a lot of classes might begin with, but I like to end with, because it's kind of trying to take all the things that you've thought about, white space, design, sentence length, word choice, cliches, active voice, passive voice, kind of all these things, and you're kind of applying them to more common or mundane, but also very important types of communications. It's kind of broken up into 2. So you'll be doing resumes / cover letters and emails. So the resume and cover letter, I'm sure all of you have some semblance of that. So if you already have one, I'm assuming that you already have one. So I'm assuming that what you're doing is not starting from scratch here, but that you are actually taking these questions and taking these approaches to resume writing and applying it to your specific document as it existed. There's so much research. You see stuff on business communication websites and stuff all the time about, or HR write-ups about kind of how long it takes for someone to get an impression of these documents. So you read before Larry Beeson's piece on kind of the ethos of error and how people see error. That applies to both emails and resumes that you're doing today, of course. As Wyans was talking about in the piece, and you guys had really productive discussion. I've enjoyed really reading through your discussion on the approach to hiring someone who makes grammatical errors. So you wouldn't get a job at iFixit if you made a grammatical error in your cover letter. But thinking about that and thinking about how that applies to these documents. So the cover letter has a pretty set formula to it. In terms of, I mean, it varies by industry and how much experience you have. Obviously, if you're kind of applying for a senior position that requires 10, 15 years of experience, you might want to go in more detail. When we apply for faculty positions, our cover letters are actually 2 single-space pages because we have to go into relative depth about our research and our teaching philosophy and stuff like that. So it does vary by discipline, but mostly across the board, you don't want to go onto a second page for sure. And the worksheet kind of outlines that. And then the resume as well. Design principles are critical for resume. So people make impressions about you. They have implicit bias with even just your name and with kind of the design of the resume itself and all these unfortunate subjectivities that involve the hiring process. I do want you to assume that you're applying for a job and you have to find an actual job ad and do all this analysis. And the worksheet goes into detail about that. Assume that you're going to get a job without knowing someone, right? Because I think we all know, like, having an in at an organization can be a very common way to get a job, and the statistics bear that out certainly. But when you don't have that connection, you have to rely on your communication skills and your design skills in terms of document design. Then certainly more attention needs to be paid to these documents. And the second half is emails itself, right? So we're kind of ending on the most mundane piece of writing, and probably 80% of the writing that we do on a daily basis, if not more, is email writing. And it's become so thoughtless, right? And there's this kind of large discussion going on about if emails, I know here in academia, we have a large conversation about, intergenerational differences between emails, right? So for older generations, emails might be seen as a letter. That's why they begin Dear Jane or whatever. And it's kind of formatting a handwritten letter for those of you who remember writing those. So you kind of follow this narrative structure in email. But for younger generations, email is essentially synonymous with a lot of text messages. So if you get an email from someone who's of a younger generation than you, so for myself, it's getting emails from 18, 20-year-olds, not to see it as disrespectful because they didn't kind of write these kind of long emails, but seeing that they're not necessarily as experienced in letter writing, and because they were kind of raised knowing what a text message is, they see communication as a very expedient process. Just to kind of stereotype and generalize there. Of course, there are exceptions, but thinking about how different generations see emails, right? So perhaps you've seen this play out in your workplace where it's not necessarily a lack of respect thing or for some other reason that's personal, but actually people have so many emails to answer and they see it like a text message that they don't begin emails the proper way. I wish I could show you the variety of emails I get from first-year students that kind of play and that kind of bear this out. And they're completely respectful, in class, but then when it comes to emails, they're using their framework for text messaging, for instant messaging into emails. So all that to say, how do we think about emails? Obviously, my advice is to kind of start, err on the side of caution, start formal, and then when people kind of use their first name in communication, then you can kind of enter into that. So each email is going to be different. You could write 3 emails in a row within 5 minutes, and they're all going to be different levels of formality and informality. So kind of this universe that you're constantly embedded in, that all of us have to be embedded in the 21st century workplace. How do we approach writing in those contexts, and how do you kind of apply the principles of rhetoric to these specific emails, and just to kind of get in the process of thinking about that. I've received emails from many of you. This is not a corrective that you guys aren't writing emails properly. It's not that at all. It's just to think about, to take these principles in rhetoric and think about your audience and how this kind of plays out in even mundane, short pieces of communication. So that's pretty much your task for this week. One thing I will say about the Wyans piece, just because I've been following discussions, it's been very interesting, is, it makes me think about how, one thing that article could have done better is, and I think he mentions it as a caveat, is given the industry that he's in, grammar is critical, right? So when I teach technical writing and we do a lot of instructional documentation and stuff like that, I love sharing case studies about how one specific typo in a technical document led to this disaster, right? Like there was one example, I think in Santa Fe, Mexico, with like a chemical spill where they used like cat litter or kitty litter to kind of neutralize a lot of chemicals, and they were talking about organic or inorganic. but they heard it as anorganic and inorganic. So there's a small little typo, and then they put non-organic stuff into the chemical, and it was kind of a disaster. So you're thinking about the particularities of that. For Kyle Wyans, that makes sense. If your iFixit is writing technical documentation, so errors are of the utmost particular. So that's what you're looking for, right? Same way when you're looking for a salesperson, you kind of think, well, are introverts the best for this job, right? You make assessments upon the quality of the individual, not because that's how we all should be hiring, but because your specific industry, that's pretty critical to be of a certain kind or a certain ilk or a certain disposition or have certain traits that are like that. So it is interesting to see, your industries, you can kind of teach them up or kind of train them up, so to speak. But in something like that, like technical writing, you get that conversation a lot about how much we should weigh those errors. So interesting conversation. Thank you for participating. I've had a blast reading through it. I've also had a blast teaching this class. So thanks for being in the class. Hope you guys got something out of it. The student opinion surveys were a part of the requirement, but I must have forgot to sign up. As a faculty, I actually have to sign up and register and click accept for summer student opinion surveys. It's a bit different than the fall and the spring, so I must not have done that. I thought I did. So it wasn't working. So if you see it in yours and you want to complete it, that's fantastic. That helps me a lot, but it's not part of the required week 6 anymore. So that's it. Hope you guys had a good class. Let me know if you have any questions or anything like that, or if you want me to take an extra close look at a resume, if there's an actual job that you're applying for by the end of the month or before the school starts, or an internship or something like that. This is what I like to do, so I'd like to help you in any way I can, kind of during class, after class, whatever. Just reach out to me. So it's good getting to know you guys, albeit from a distance. I hope you guys enjoyed the class, and wish you the best of luck in your rest of your MBA and in your careers beyond it.